find it almost hard to believe I'm asking the question, but I am. Has NATO had it? I'm joined first by Campaign Against Nuclear Disarmament's General Secretary, Sophie Bolt. Good morning to you, Sophie.
Morning. It's a campaign for nuclear disarmament. It's all right, you're not the first.
I was marching with you guys in 80 and 81. Yeah, I should at least remember what I was marching for, shouldn't I? Right. Well, at least that's one laugh to be had.
Yeah.
Has NATO had it, Sophie?
Well, I think it's, it's an absolute disaster. And I think that, NATO has always been a military nuclear alliance for the US. It's all about projecting sort of US power. It's all about US interests. It's never really been about kind of, defending Europe. And I think that what we're seeing now is, the gloves are off with Trump, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? So it's becoming really clear to people that that's what it's about. And I think the sort of fiasco and the sort of the horrific situation with the threat to Greenland has just really exposed that. The fact that you have like the most powerful kind of NATO state, the US, threatening another NATO state just shows that it's not a defensive alliance. You know what I mean? This is just really about what the US can get. And I think that it brings up the whole issue around sovereignty. Of course, a massive issue of sovereignty for Greenland. We know that Trump wants to own as much of Greenland as he possibly can. And part of that, we know that there are, discussions going on now at the Munich Security Conference, with Denmark about whether, the US still can own, territory around its military base. Why does it want to do that? Because it wants to be able to do exactly what it wants. It doesn't want to have any brakes on it, and that's incredibly dangerous.
Is there a risk that we are going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that what we're living through at the moment is an aberration, and it could be set right with the disappearance from the political scene of a handful of individuals? Is that a possibility on the horizon? We're talking about the end of NATO, talking about possible alternatives, and yet only a few years ago these conversations weren't even on the table. So could they disappear as quickly when Trump disappears?
Well, I think no, because I think NATO is a problem here. It's an aggressive alliance. At the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union had dissolved, the Warsaw Pact, the military alliance around the Soviet Union, was ended. That would have been the time to reset things. You know what I mean? But NATO just aggressively expanded across Europe. And that, to this day, that is massively destabilised the relationship between Europe and Russia, between, Russia and Ukraine. And unfortunately, obviously, like, Russia should never have invaded Ukraine. Absolutely catastrophic, illegal invasion. But the aggressive role of NATO has worsened that situation and actually sort of, precipitated that situation. There was big pressure on Ukraine to join NATO, which would have been, really catastrophic. And I think that's at the heart of this.
Some would argue that if nuclear vessels were in Ukraine, then Ukraine wouldn't have been invaded. And there's an argument that people will probably have for years to come on that. But time is short. I must ask you, Sophie, what's the alternative? What new organisation, what new treaty does the United Kingdom need to form or be part of?
Well, we need to totally reset relations with Europe. We totally need to reset relations with the US. I mean, we definitely should not be part of a military alliance with the United States. It's just dragging us into, potentially World War III that could go nuclear. I mean, you look at like what Trump is doing in terms of, illegally attacking Venezuela. Now, real risks of another illegal attack on Iran. And Britain is completely, integrated into the military and nuclear alliance with
So
with
a Euro army, Sophie? Some kind of quasi-conventional European army?
Well, I think that, to copy NATO, in this, militarily kind of aggressive, accelerating, rearmament type approach has got us to this point. Where we are in a situation where the risk of nuclear weapons being used over Ukraine has never been greater. So I would say that strategy has totally failed, and to just repeat that is completely and utterly reckless. What we need to be moving away from this, seeing military as a solution. It totally is not.
Sophie, I have so much sympathy for the cause, but when you have someone like Putin, you can't just say, let's just talk our way out of it, because he's not interested. At some point, we have to make a stand, do we not?
Well, but that has been going on, hasn't it? We have seen this big military escalation. For 4 years, that has been the strategy. And all I'm saying is that has not worked.
Okay. Sophie, pleasure talking to you. Sophie there from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I still can't believe I misread that. Let me bring in Marko Mihkelson now. He's Estonian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee Chair, and he's joining us from Munich. Good morning to you, Marko.
Good morning.
I'm troubled by even asking the question, has NATO had it? But I'm listening to Keir Starmer yesterday, and his call for Europe to come together is not a million miles from what our Green Party leader has been talking about. Europe must come together, and we can no longer rely on the United States. And that does give a sort of cumulative impression that maybe NATO has had it.
First, I would like to just comment what your radio listeners heard from your previous case, that NATO is a very aggressive alliance and aggressively enlarged towards the east, towards Russian borders. This is unfortunately exactly the Russian propaganda, what we hear from Moscow and from those who don't understand the realities in Europe. Estonia is a small nation with 1.3 million people who was occupied for 50 years under the Soviet Empire, from World War II till 1991. Obviously, from very the first moment we regained our independence, we understood that being alone, small nation and Russian border, we never will be safe.
Right.
And that was our very strongly committed by all political forces aim to become member of NATO, because NATO was, still is and will be, in my understanding, the main guarantee for nations who have been always left behind, unfortunately. And secondly, if you look back into history, and beyond last year, let's say, but decades and maybe even centuries, you understand that Europe is always been very vulnerable from challenges from outside,
yes,
specifically from Russia and perhaps from other corners of the world as well. And that tells you that we have to stick together. We have to have solid defense cooperation
with the United States.
NATO is the best what nations ever agreed to put together.
But whilst there's a large part of me which is inclined to agree, an awful lot has changed with Donald Trump, and maybe I can ask you the same question. I mean, are we in danger of saying, of our political leaders saying, we need to stand together as Europe, we can't rely on the United States, we need some kind of new organisation, NATO is dead, and then a few years down the line we no longer have Putin, we no longer have Trump, and we no longer have NATO, the security that NATO brought with it?
These are obviously very valid and important questions, but at the same time we have to understand what is strategy of Russia, of Putin's Russia. The one is And war in Europe is going on, massive war is going on soon already, 5th year. We will enter into 5th year. Beside destroying Ukraine's sovereignty, Putin's aim is to destroy NATO. Are we going to be allies for Putin to destroy NATO by ourselves? Or we stand together, we stick together, and we also preserve the transatlantic alliance, because one of the aims for a long time for Russia and also for China has been to destroy transatlantic alliance of Western world here in North Atlantic. And this is why I understand those challenges, what we have with current administration in Washington. But what are the alternatives?
If I may say so, that is the most excellent point to end on, that when we're having a discussion about the death of NATO, one man we know who's keener than almost anybody on the planet for NATO to be over is Putin. Marko Mihkelson, pleasure talking to you.